You're watching Race to Power. I'm Shreya Upadhyay. On the show today, we talk about Iran. The country's supreme leader spoke for a second time today and he warned Donald Trump against interfering in the internal affairs of Iran. Decoding the expanding Iranian protests with our guests on the show. We also go to Brussels, where European Union diplomats have met to approve the Mercosur deal, even as European farmers are back on the streets protesting against it. More on this up ahead, but first let's begin with Iran. Chaos on the streets of Iran has only intensified in the past several days. The demonstrations, which began with traders marching against economic hardships, has now snowballed into blanket anger against the ruling dispensation. On Thursday, thousands came out for another night in Tehran. Chants of death to the dictator filled the air. A similar scene unfolded in northern Iran's Gorgan city, where demonstrators shouted similar slogans into the night. In Isfahan, in central Iran, a building of Iran's state broadcaster was set on fire. As protests roll, online live metrics show that Iran is now in the midst of a nationwide blackout. In contrast, pro-government rallies took place hours ago, with Iranians supportive of the supreme leader chanting slogans and marching in several cities. Visuals of these gatherings and rallies have emerged from Ardabil, Khurramabad, Arak and Sari. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has, for the second time, addressed the demonstrations as well as the vandalism that unfolded in the country last night. In his latest comments, Khamenei also lashed out at the United States for alleged interference and provocation. He also took a swipe at Donald Trump to handle the affairs of his own country.
یه مش تخریبگر آمدن ساختمان متعلق به کشور خودشون رو خراب کردن. مثلا فرض کنید فلان ساختمان دیواری رو خراب کردن برای که دل رئیس جمهور آمریکا خوش بیاد. او اگه میتونه کشور خودش رو اداره کنه، تو کشور خودش حوادث گوناگونی وجود داره.
Khamenei also added that Trump's hands were, quote, stained with the blood of more than 1,000 Iranians. And he predicted that Trump would be overthrown like the Pahlavi dynasty of Iran was during the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Now, these comments appear to have a more targeted tone towards Washington as compared to the Supreme Leader's last remark on the 3rd of January. Back then, Khamenei had acknowledged the legitimacy of the protest but warned against rioting and instead having dialogue with the demonstrators.
اعتراض بجاست، اما اعتراض غیر از اغتشاش است. ما با معترض حرف میزنیم، باید حرف بزنن مسئولین با معترض، اما با اغتشاشگر حرف زدن فایده ای نداره. اغتشاشگر رو باید به جای خودش نشاند.
Remember, protests first began in Iran's capital on the 28th of December last year, with depleting currency value and the cost of living crisis as the main flashpoints. But the uproar has taken a political turn. Within days, clashes took place across cities between police and demonstrators. Then, following a public call by the ousted Shah of Iran's son of Iran's Shah, Reza Pahlavi, thousands stepped out in different cities across Iran and called for an end of the Islamist regime. As tensions flare, Iran government proposed monthly allowances. It is scheduled to come into effect on Saturday, that's 10th of January. This allowance of $7 worth in local currency is for the next 4 months that authorities propose to alleviate economic pressure. So far, the announcement 4 days ago has done little to curb anger on the streets of Iran. And the question is, will its implementation and the money in the banks of Iranians be enough? And joining me live from Washington, D.C. is Nader Hashmi. He's an associate professor of Middle East and Islamic politics at the Georgetown University. Mr. Nader Hashmi, thank you very much for sparing the time to talk with us at WION. I want to start by asking you about the Supreme Leader's address today, the second time since he has spoken and addressed the country. And as the trajectory of the protests moves, so does the tone and tenor of the Supreme Commander. Initially, he was conciliatory towards them. Now he's warning Donald Trump and he's calling the demonstrators as rioters. What do you make of it?
Well, I think everything that we're hearing from Iran's senior leadership is straight out of the authoritarian playbook. When you face a mass uprising that you cannot stop, you blame outsiders, you blame, in this case, the United States. Now, Donald Trump is a monumentally corrupt and authoritarian political leader in an American context, but he's not responsible for these protests. These protests should be laid fundamentally at the doorstep of Iran's corrupt ruling elite and the supreme leader, who've presided over a deeply authoritarian system that simply does not meet the demands of the Iranian people today.
Mr. Hashmi, tomorrow is when that entire scheme of distributing $7 to all Iranians starts. These protests, of course, started as an economic concern amid Iranians, but now they've turned into a political rebellion. There are many who say that there is deep-seated frustration. You're also somebody who says that this is an authoritarian regime which prevails in Iran. And so will such a step of distributing some amount of money to Iranians, will it help in quelling these protests?
I don't think so, because if you just listen to the slogans that are being chanted in the towns, villages, and cities across Iran, they're not chanting for state subsidies and for economic support from the government. These are political slogans rooted in deep anger and frustration over the state of politics. Next month marks the 47th anniversary of Iran's Islamic Revolution. It was a popular revolution. It did reflect popular opinion over the years, but increasingly it has become very authoritarian, very repressive. And I don't think people can be bought off by giving them, a monthly stipend to pay for food prices, which are skyrocketing because of out of control inflation and the depletion of the value of the currency. So this is very much a series of political grievances that were sparked by economic frustrations, but they're fundamentally, this is a political revolution that we're seeing unfolding in front of us.
So what is the solution? Is regime change the only solution that Iran is staring at the moment?
Well, I think the solution is regime change, but it critically needs to be regime change that is brought about by the Iranian people without external intervention from the United States, and facilitate regime change. But what happened in the aftermath of that attack that killed roughly 1,000 Iranians is that the regime actually benefited from that attack because people rallied around the flag. There was a deep sense of patriotism. So the solutions are fundamentally rooted in just fundamental universal concerns that most reasonable people can understand. Accountable government, representative government, an end to corruption, giving people a voice in the governance of their affairs. And of course, this is very difficult to do in many countries in the Middle East because all of these countries are ruled by authoritarian, despotic regimes, some more despotic than others. But because of the geostrategic location, the external intervention complicates this picture.
Do you think Reza Pahlavi would be able to get this kind of a stable democratic government in Iran?
Absolutely not. Reza Pahlavi is a clown politician. He represents the political ideals of his father, who presided over a deeply authoritarian, repressive system that produced the Iranian Revolution 47 years ago. He's very close to Benjamin Netanyahu. I think his political convictions are very much in the direction of trying to replace the current authoritarian regime in Iran with another authoritarian regime. I don't think the Iranian people want to go backward. They want to go forward toward a representative government that represents the aspirations of the people of Iran. So I don't think he's a credible alternative.
All right, we'll leave it there. Mr. Hashmi, thank you very much for giving us your perspective. Let's wait and watch what happens in Iran in the next few weeks. For now, of course, these protests continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. It is an important day for a vote on the future of the Mercosur deal. It is also a critical day for the stakeholders directly impacted, the farmers of Europe. A fresh wave of protests has spread across member states of the bloc. Member states of the European Union have given a go-ahead for the consequential trade deal between the European Union and Latin American countries. This approval comes despite France's opposition at a diplomat-level meeting in Brussels. It is being said that the bloc will sign this agreement next week. But there is angst and dissent against this deal, which has seen building up for days in the latest wave of protests. Less than an hour away from the Belgian capital, farmers have blocked highways on Thursday night local time, rallying against the trade deal with Latin America.
There is a lot of pain, there is a lot of anger, and it's becoming more and more tense, whether it's here, in France, or in neighboring countries that are part of Europe. It's really something that concerns all of us and will impact all of us. So, the feeling is very, very special because we have a feeling, a real feeling, of abandonment.
In France, protests have continued for another consecutive day, pressuring the country's government to reject the Mercosur deal. France's leadership has already said that they will not be willing to sign this agreement. A similar scene unfolded in Poland's capital, Warsaw, as well. Hundreds came out on the streets with banners and loudspeakers in hand, urging lawmakers to stop the Mercosur trade deal. Remember, this deal has been 25 years in the making. The trade pact with Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay and Uruguay would be the EU's largest in terms of tariff cuts. Germany, Spain and the Nordic countries say that it will boost exports hit by US tariffs and reduce reliance on China by securing access to minerals. But farmers across Europe and France fear an influx of cheap commodities that could hurt European farmers, which is what hundreds are still protesting about. And to get us more from Brussels, I'm joined by William Denslow. William, this is an important day in Brussels. All eyes, of course, on that particular meeting. All the EU agricultural ministers now eyeing that the Mercosur deal gets through. But obviously, there have been concerns. The French farmers are back on the streets of Paris, and they are not letting their own government sign this deal.
Well, the real question heading into this vote was, what would Rome decide? Now, why this is significant and why Italy's vote perhaps matters more than most on this particular day is that they are seen on this occasion as kingmakers. The reason for that is that this trade deal that you rightly mentioned has been in the works for over 2 decades now. It doesn't need to be decided unanimously by European capitals. In fact, only a minimum of 15 nations of the 27 EU member states are required as part of a qualified majority, as long as those 15 member states make up 65% or more of the total population. Now, that means that the likes of France, the likes of Poland could vote against this move, but if the qualified majority still exists, then this deal can go through. Rome had pushed for this vote to be delayed when it was expected to go through at the end of 2025. But it seems that Giorgia Meloni, the leader of Italy, has now backed this move, which is meaning that it is expected to go in force. Some concessions for farmers have been made in recent days, but of course, as you rightly mentioned, there's still plenty of anger amongst the agricultural sector that they'll be adversely impacted by this significant trade deal.
All right, William Denslow, let's see what happens today in Brussels. Thanks very much for getting us the latest at the moment. All right, let's shift our focus now to the United States of America. Anti-ICE protests have been intensifying in America after back-to-back shooting incidents involving the U.S. federal agents. And in the latest, 2 people were shot and wounded by the Border Patrol agents in Portland. This, remember, comes after a woman was gunned down by an ICE agent in Minneapolis. The White House maintains that the law enforcement acted as per protocol, but state leaders and activists are demanding accountability. Crowds filled streets in Minneapolis and Portland overnight. Protesters chanted anti-ICE slogans and confronted heavily armed federal officers. Pepper balls and tear gas were used to push the crowds back. Several arrests were reported. Demonstrations are also spreading nationwide, from New York and Washington to California, Texas, and Georgia.
Now, our streets, no justice, no peace. We want ICE out now! ICE out now!
I feel like we're at a turning point. I can't say it enough, but you know, things have got to change, but we're coming together, and if any place, it's going to be Minnesota, or like, get out of here. We don't want you. You have no right to be here. You're destroying our communities. Just leave.
Meanwhile, India has also reacted to the deadly shooting. The Ministry of External Affairs said that they're closely following the developments, as they are concerned for a large Indian community in US, including students and professionals.
We are closely following the developments in and around Minneapolis shooting. We are concerned as we have a large Indian diaspora or Indian community, a large Indian community in the United States, including large number of students. We also have a large number of professionals and other people, so naturally it's a matter of concern for us.
The unrest was triggered by the fatal shooting of a 37-year-old woman, Renee Nicole Good. She was shot at by an ICE agent during an immigration operation in Minneapolis. Federal officials say the lady tried to drive away, claiming her car blocked the agents and posed a threat. They say the officer acted in self-defense. In fact, American Vice President Vance doubled down on the self-defense bit, saying that the death of the woman was a tragedy of her own making. But Minnesota officials dispute that account. Video footage reviewed by lawmakers appears to contradict federal claims. Minnesota's Democratic Governor Tim Walz called these protests as patriotic. He demanded state participation in the investigation. But federal authorities reversed course, blocking state investigators and taking sole control of the probe. Vance called Minnesota Governor Tim Walz a joke. Meanwhile, just a day later, in Portland, Border Patrol agents shot and wounded a man and a woman during what authorities called a targeted vehicle stop. The Department of Homeland Security claims the driver tried to run the agents over. It says an officer fired a defensive shot. Local police say they were not involved. The FBI, meanwhile, is leading this investigation now. The Trump administration says officers are facing rising threats and are enforcing the law under dangerous conditions. The larger picture is that some critics are arguing that federal agents are using excessive force. They call it an aggressive immigration crackdown, with investigations ongoing and protests growing. America's immigration debate is once again spilling onto the streets, raising fear and questions among its own citizens. US President Donald Trump says that he has cancelled a planned second wave of attacks on Venezuela. He says he no longer thinks that they will be needed because of a, quote, smart gesture made by the country's new interim president. And that gesture was the release of political prisoners. On Thursday this week, Venezuela released hundreds of prisoners, both Venezuelan and foreign nationals. The people released include activists, journalists, and even high-profile opposition figures. Among them were former presidential candidate Enrique Marquez and other senior opposition leaders. The Venezuelan government says that this gesture was an olive branch.
Consider this gesture by the Bolivarian government, which is broadly intended to seek peace, as the contribution that we must all make to it.
This announcement was made by George Rodriguez, the brother of Venezuela's interim president, Delcy Rodriguez. He's also the president of Venezuela's National Assembly, or the parliament. The gesture was very well received by President Trump.
Prisoners that nobody thought they would ever see again are being released, yeah. And in many cases, good people is what I understand. But prisoners nobody ever thought they'd be released. So we're going to be working with them and leadership of the country.
Donald Trump then put up this post on his social media platform. He said that because the prisoners were freed, he had cancelled an expected second wave of attacks on Venezuela. He also added that the US and Venezuela's new government are now working together to rebuild the country's oil infrastructure. That big oil would invest at least $100 billion in Venezuela.
Meet with the biggest oil people in the world. They're all coming here at the top.
India has said that Prime Minister Narendra Modi and American President Donald Trump have spoken 8 times in 2025 amid the tussle between the two countries over the imposition of tariffs by the US and the free trade negotiations. The Indian Foreign Ministry's reaction comes amid remarks made by the US Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, who claimed that India-US trade deal did not happen because Prime Minister Modi did not call President Trump. India called the characterization of these discussions in the reported remarks by the US Commerce Secretary as inaccurate.
On several occasions, we have been close to a deal. The characterization of these discussions in the reported remarks is not accurate. We remain interested in a mutually beneficial trade deal between two complementary economies and look forward to concluding it.
Earlier, Howard Lutnick, in a podcast with an American venture capitalist, had claimed that the entire India-US trade deal structure was negotiated and ready, but the American side expected Prime Minister Modi to call the American president as the final step. Lutnick claimed the Indian side was uncomfortable in making this call and the talks collapsed.
Middle of the next week, we did Indonesia, the Philippines, right? Vietnam. We announced a whole bunch of deals.
Malaysia in that period.
So we did these whole bunch of deals. So that's like
that staircase.
And they were and because we negotiated them and assumed India was going to be done before them, I had negotiated them at a higher rate. So now the problem is the deals came out at a higher rate.
Right.
And then India calls back and says, "Oh, okay, we're ready." I said, "Ready for what?"
Lutnick's comments come just days after President Trump claimed that Prime Minister Modi is not happy with him because of the tariffs imposed over purchase of Russian oil. He suggested that while relations remain cordial, the tariff issue has created some tension. New Delhi and Washington have been negotiating a trade deal since the US imposed a 25% tariff on India in August last year. And with that, it's a wrap on Race to Power, but news and updates will continue on WION. Thank you very much for joining us at the moment. Bye-bye.
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression, anxiety, and other conditions. We use the traditions of centuries-old natural science from India, yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy in personalized programs that help you take charge of your own health. A minimum 5-day stay is recommended for best results. Book now at yo1.com.
From the bustling trading floors of Wall Street to the vibrant exchanges of Asian stock markets, WION breaks it down for you to make sense of what's happening, as we reveal the key factors behind events, strategic battles, and the game-changing business decisions that shape the world. We bring you all of this and more on World Business Watch. Where darkness hides behind every corner. Where the truth is stranger than fiction. A show that dives deep into the stories which shock and mystify. Unsolved murders. Psychopaths who defy explanation. International war crimes. And millions swindled in financial fraud. The victims, the accused, and the sinister plot. Prime Crime is your front row seat to darkness.
Vielleicht nur als Impostant.
WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens.